Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Anako.
Welcome to this deep dive into, well, a really transformative period in Japanese history.
Hmm.
We're talking about that era of rapid economic growth and the huge societal changes that followed.
Yeah, it's how Japan really burst onto the global stage as a major economic power.
So what were the key factors? What really propelled this ascent?
It's a fascinating story, really rooted in the post-war recovery. The late 1950s were crucial. There was a global economic boom happening.
Oh, right. Good timing.
Exactly. And that created strong demand for Japanese exports. It allowed Japan not just to rebuild, but actually, exceed its pre-war industrial production levels.
So that laid the foundation.
Pretty much. A
Now,
powerful foundation for everything that came next.
okay, so the stage was set. Then we hit the 1960s. And I know the Ikeda Hayato cabinet's income doubling policy is seen as a massive turning point.
Oh, absolutely.
But what did that actually involve? How did a policy, a plan, translate into such explosive growth?
That's a really good question. The income doubling plan wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was quite a comprehensive strategy.
Okay.
There was significant government investment targeted at key industries, things like petrochemicals, automobiles, fostering tech innovation, and huge capital investments.
So picking winners, essentially.
Sort of, yeah. Boosting productivity was also key. The thinking was if incomes went up, people would spend more, driving more demand.
Ah, that positive feedback loop.
Exactly. And it worked remarkably well under Ikeda and then the Sadaoisaku cabinets through the 60s and early 70s. Unprecedented prosperity.
And this is when Japan's GNP becomes #2 in the free world, just behind the U.S. Late 60s, right?
That's right. An astonishing climb in a relatively short time.
Was it all internally driven, or did international connections play a bigger role beyond just exports by then?
Oh, global engagement was absolutely vital. Japan joining the IMF as an Article 8 nation in '64 was a big step.
What did that mean practically?
It signaled economic maturity. It meant liberalizing trade rules because Japan's international balance of payments was looking pretty healthy.
Yep.
And then joining the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that further pushed the liberalization of capital transactions. These weren't just symbolic club memberships. They actively changed how Japan interacted economically with the world.
Right, and Japanese companies started expanding outward too, didn't they? Not just exporting goods, but setting up shop elsewhere.
Yes, exactly. That 1965 photo you sometimes see, the joint venture in the Philippines making black and white TVs, that's a perfect example.
So setting up production overseas.
Yeah.
Why the move into developing countries specifically?
Well, several reasons. Accessing new markets, for one.
Yeah.
Resources, sometimes cheaper labor costs.
Sure.
It was also about gaining experience operating internationally, which helped build long-term competitiveness. It was more than just trade. It was about building a global economic footprint.
This huge economic shift must have completely reshaped Japanese society. The lifestyle revolution, they call it. It wasn't just about GDP figures, was it?
Not at all. That's the core of it. You saw a rapid shift away from farming primary industries.
Right.
And a huge growth in the service sector, new kinds of jobs. And crucially, working class incomes went up consistently year after year.
So a tangible improvement in living standards for ordinary people.
Definitely. And that old pre-war gap between, say, city life and country life, it started to shrink quite dramatically.
And you see that reflected in what people owned, right? The
Mhm.
figures for things like electric washing machines, refrigerators.
Oh, absolutely. And then color TVs and cars.
Yeah.
The jump in ownership between, say, 1966 and 1980 is just staggering.
What does that tell us about aspirations?
It points to a society becoming much more consumer-focused.
Mhm.
These weren't just luxuries anymore. They were becoming, accessible essentials. It showed people had more disposable income.
You had a desire for modern comforts.
Exactly. And even things like cameras, pianos, air conditioners seeing big increases. It suggests broader leisure activities, cultural interests taking root, too.
And this must tie into household finances. Did average incomes and spending patterns change significantly?
Oh, massively. If you track the data from the mid-50s through to the late 80s, average incomes just climbed and climbed.
Right.
And importantly, the slice of the budget needed for just basic food costs went down.
Which frees up money for other things.
Precisely. For leisure, education, maybe saving for one of those new cars or TVs, it all fed back into the economy and that rising standard of living.
And it wasn't just about buying things, was it? Leisure started looking outwards too. Overseas travel was liberalized in '64.
Yes, another big shift. By the 1980s, millions of Japanese people were traveling abroad each year. That's a real internationalization of leisure time.
A world away from the immediate post-war years.
Absolutely. And alongside that, you had major improvements in public health. Better hygiene, medical advances, life expectancy shot up.
Making Japan one of the longest-lived nations.
By the 80s, yes, around 75 for men, 80 for women. Really remarkable gains.
This era also saw massive national development projects. The Shinkansen, the bullet train, opening in '64 is always the icon that comes to mind.
Such a powerful symbol, wasn't it? But hugely practical, too.
How so? What was the broader impact of projects like that?
Well, the Shinkansen, the new expressways, the subway systems in big cities, they transformed connectivity, made moving people and goods much faster, easier. It lubricated the economy.
And changed the landscape.
Literally. All the construction, the high-rise buildings going up, it completely reshaped Japan's cities, which you have to remember had been devastated just a couple of decades earlier. It was a very visible sign of progress and confidence.
Okay, but rapid growth like that, it always has a shadow side, doesn't it?
Right.
We have to talk about the environmental costs.
Yes, that's crucial. The environmental impact was, frankly, severe. Rapid industrialization just churned out waste and emissions.
Leading to pollution.
Widespread pollution. Air, rivers, the sea. And tragically, this led to serious pollution-related diseases in several areas. It was a stark reminder of the downsides of unchecked growth.
And it wasn't just industrial pollution, was it? The cities themselves were facing problems.
That's right. The huge migration to places like Tokyo, well, it led to overcrowding.
What do you mean?
Soaring land prices, making housing incredibly expensive and scarce. More traffic accidents, constant traffic jams. It definitely affected the quality of life.
And on the flip side, rural areas started emptying out.
Exactly. Depopulation became a real issue as young people, especially, left for the cities seeking jobs and opportunities. Created a kind of imbalance.
But people did react to the pollution problems, right? There was public concern.
Yes, thankfully. Grassroots movements started to emerge, residents protesting against pollution and environmental destruction. It grew into a significant public concern.
And the government had to respond.
Eventually, yes. The Basic Law for Environmental Pollution Control in 1967 was a major step. It set up a legal framework. And then establishing the Environment Agency in 1971 showed a more concrete commitment to tackling pollution and protecting the environment.
And those terrible big four pollution cases, Minamata, Yokochiasma, Itai disease, they really highlighted the human cost and led to landmark court battles, didn't they?
They did. They were tragic, but pivotal in forcing change and accountability.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the political scene during this time. The LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, was dominant for a long stretch, wasn't it, through the 60s and 70s?
Very much so. They held a stable majority in the House of Representatives for a long time.
What kept them in power for so long?
Well, partly, they presided over this incredible economic success, and they could certainly take credit for that. They also had a strong organizational base, especially in rural areas, and for a while, the opposition parties were quite fragmented.
But that dominance didn't last forever.
No, it didn't. Over time, you started seeing growing dissatisfaction, concerns about, the LDP being in power for so long, internal factional fighting, corruption scandals.
Things that chip away at public trust.
Exactly. And it gradually eroded their support base and their number of seats.
Which led to that moment in the 1983 election where they actually lost their outright majority.
That's right, a significant moment. The second Nakasone cabinet had to form a coalition with the New Liberal Club just to stay in power.
What did that tell us about the political climate?
It showed the LDP's grip was weakening, and the opposition was changing too. The main Socialist Party was declining, but you saw the rise of others, the Democratic Socialists, the Komeito Party with its religious base, even the Communist Party regained some ground. It became a more multipolar landscape.
Interesting. And wasn't there also a trend for a while in the 70s of more reform-minded governors being elected locally, focusing on welfare, environment?
Yes, there was, in several prefectures and cities. But it's also true that many of those administrations didn't last into the 1980s.
Why was that?
Oh, probably a mix of factors, maybe difficulties implementing big changes, perhaps financial pressures, or just shifts in local political winds back towards more conservative forces later on.
Okay. Now, let's talk culture during this period. It seems like two big themes emerge.
Yeah.
Popularization and internationalization.
Absolutely. And television was huge for popularization. TV broadcasting started in '53, but it really exploded from the '60s onwards.
Became ubiquitous.
Pretty much. By the '80s, almost every single household, like 98%, had a TV. That creates a shared national culture, a mass culture, in a way that wasn't possible before.
And then satellite TV came along.
Mid-'80s, yeah.
Yeah.
Bringing global events into Japanese living rooms in real time. Add to that the major newspapers with massive circulations, millions of copies, plus all the weekly magazines. It really contributed to a homogenization of lifestyles and information access.
Education access expanded dramatically too, right?
Hugely. High school enrollment went over 90% in the '70s. It essentially became almost compulsory, even if not technically so.
And universities.
University enrollment surged as well, past 30% by the late '70s. A massive expansion of higher education.
But that brought its own pressures.
It did. Intense competition for university entrance exams, the infamous exam hell, and growing awareness of disparities between different schools and universities.
Still, despite those issues, Japan was gaining serious international recognition in academia and the arts, especially science and tech.
Definitely. You had Nobel Prizes for physicists like Yukawa Hideki and Tomonaga Shinichiro.
And Kawabata Yasunari for literature.
Exactly. Plus hosting huge international events like the Tokyo Olympics in '64 and the Osaka World Expo in '70. These really showcased Japan's achievements on the world stage culturally, technologically.
And there was also a move to protect Japan's own heritage.
Yes, alongside embracing the new, there was a growing effort to preserve tradition. The Law for the Protection of Cultural Properties, setting up the Agency for Cultural Affairs, the National Museum of Japanese History. These showed a commitment to safeguarding Japan's past as well.
Okay, finally, let's touch on that really interesting cultural exchange. Japan, France, and ukiyo-e prints.
It's amazing how these 19th century woodblock prints just took France by storm.
Japanism!
It is amazing. Ukiyo-e offered something completely new to Western artists.
What was it about them?
Well, the vibrant colors, the bold, flat compositions, unusual angles, focusing on everyday scenes. It was so different from traditional European art.
Right.
Artists like Monet were clearly influenced. You see it in his compositions. Van Gogh was fascinating, even directly copied prints by Hiroshi while developing his own unique style.
And incredibly, this Western craze then influenced how Japan saw its own art.
It did. It led to a kind of reassessment back home. Artists like Shiraku, who maybe hadn't been fully appreciated in his own time in Japan, gained huge recognition after being celebrated in the West. This actually sparked efforts to buy back some of the ukiyo-e that had been sold overseas.
And Kojiro Matsukata was key there.
Yes, the son of the Meiji statesman. He was a big collector, initially a French impressionist, actually.
But he also bought back ukiyo-e.
He did. His own story is fascinating. He faced financial trouble and temporarily lost control of his impressionist collection stored in France.
But didn't that collection eventually come back to Japan?
It did after World War II. The French government returned the Matsukata collection remaining in France, gifting it to Japan on the condition it would be preserved and publicly displayed.
Which led to the National Museum of Western Art in Ueno, Tokyo.
Exactly. Designed by the famous architect Le Corbusier, specifically to house the Matsukata collection. It stands as this permanent symbol of that incredible cross-cultural exchange and appreciation between Japan and France.
Wow. Well, this deep dive really shows what a complex, dynamic period this was for Japan. The economic miracle, sure, but also the profound societal shifts, the environmental growing pains, the political evolution, and this fascinating cultural flowering and international exchange.
It absolutely laid the foundations for the Japan we know today, with all its strengths and ongoing challenges.
We hope this exploration has given you a clearer picture of this incredibly important era. What parts of this story stood out most to you? What other questions does it spark about Japan's journey?
There's always more to explore, so we definitely encourage you to keep digging into these fascinating topics in Japanese history.